Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring you curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune. Now I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we share stories from family and friends of Gordon Bushnell, the man who tried to single-handedly build a Duluth-Fargo highway. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Back to tell us more about this ambitious Northlander is News Tribune reporter Jimmy Lovrien. Jimmy, welcome back.
Thank you, Wyatt.
All right, Jimmy, before we get into the focus of today's Northlandia episode, let's maybe go back, because this is a true part two of sorts.
Yes.
Not necessarily, I don't want to say not planned, because you kind of threw it out there to hear from people more about this man. But we originally did an episode on Gordon, episode 44, if you want to check out the original coverage of this story. But for those who aren't familiar with the story, let's just give a quick summary. Who is this man? Why are we talking about him?
Yeah, so Gordon Bushnell was most notably, he tried to single-handedly build a highway from Duluth to Fargo. He wanted a straight line. And in the 50s, or in the late 40s, he was a state senator from Minnesota, and he tried to get it passed there, Highway D, passed at the legislature. It couldn't get it there, and so he took it upon himself to build it himself, and he did so into his 80s until he suffered a stroke and then was sidelined. So he became famous after On the Road, CBS's On the Road with Charles Kuralt paid him a visit and did a segment about him. NBC's Real People a few years later did the same thing, and he's kind of tied to Kuralt's legacy because that's the kind of story he liked to tell on Real People, and that's kind of how his Gordon Bushnell story has lived on. So anyway, last month I had heard about it, I wrote about it, but I hadn't found any family members, and so I put a call out if anyone knew him or was related to him to reach out, and I got a handful of responses, actually quite a few responses, which was good. And so kind of part two is more about who he was as a person.
Again, if you want to know more about the nuts and bolts of what he did or tried to do, check out episode 44 of the podcast. So you put a call out for people to reach out to you with stories about Gordon. What did you learn from people who reached out? What obviously, it sounds like people did reach out.
Oh, yeah.
But we can't always say that we get success with that always. But in this case, you did find success.
Yes. Two of his grandchildren who spent their time out there on Highway D helping when they were growing up. One of them would walk like 1.25 miles of Highway D. He would walk it every day to the bus stop with his siblings because he lived out on the property there. And a great-grandchild of Gordon's reached out who could barely remember. You know, he was very young at the time. Gordon died, but he said watching the Real People video that we had in our article brought back memories because he remembered the truck, that Gordon was driving, and suddenly he was like, oh yeah, I remember, sitting on the flatbed riding home from Highway D. Someone who had some property out there and had helped their stepfather deliver loads of gravel to Gordon, reached out, and he said that they brought all these loads of gravel, and Gordon refused to accept the help. They brought it to him, and he was going to handle the rest. He wasn't going to have them help on the road. That was his project. And so by the time he died, he had actually built like 12 miles of road. And that's another thing. Both Brent Bushnell, one of his grandchildren, and then Brent's cousin, Tim Bushnell, another grandchild of Gordon's, showed me on Google Maps the straight line scar that you can still see stretching across, Carleton and Aitkin counties, mainly Aitkin, but kind of right on that edge. Anyway, you can still see that, and you can see where they still have some property there. And then they're kind of like, okay, now follow it there. It's overgrown there, but you can still see it from above. This is where we have our land where we still ride snowmobiles on it, and it connects to our own, network of trails on our land. And so that was cool. And then I also had someone who reached out who remembers walking out there with his son, and his son reached out and they spoke about, kind of what they remember about it. And then I also had someone from England. Apparently he went to UMD, but he lives in England now, he said, and he was trying to think of the story. Like he had kind of remembered the basics of this guy who was trying to build a road, and he was thinking, and maybe he had seen something on Johnny Carson about it. He was trying to figure out what the story was and who it was, and then this jogged his memory. So yeah, we heard from quite a few folks, and I think someone else, there was a writer or reporter from back in the day who had done an article about him that reached out. So yeah, a lot of people who had memories of him, whether personally mostly, but also some who, recalled the story and appreciated the, jogging memory on it. So that was cool. And we learned more about who Gordon was kind of as a person, not just this story he's kind of famous for, but who he was when he wasn't working on the road, which he did every morning.
It's interesting because, on part one of this, we were looking at it from a perspective that, learning about it decades later, kind of trying to imagine what this must have been like, and maybe wonder what people around him like literally nearby, and then also friends hearing about it and interacting with him, you wonder what they thought about all of this.
Yes.
And so do you actually interact with them when you were talking with them? What was kind of the vibe you were getting from them in terms of were they kind of getting they're proud of him and the work he's done, or man, that was a crazy time, or I remember that was something,
right?
What was kind of maybe a mixture of the both, what was kind of the vibe you were getting?
Maybe I think from his family they're very proud, and it demonstrates the work ethic that he had and passed through the Bushnell family. They feel very strongly about that and how that's exemplified in this project. And so Tim said that there was this bog that the road was to go through, and so Gordon was coming at it from one side, and then he went as far as he could, several hundred feet, and then he came at it from the other side to try to kind of meet in the middle. And that's how to him that exemplified and you've got a problem in front of you, attack it from both sides. And that's what I heard from his one of Gordon's great-grandchildren. Everyone in that family is stubborn and hardworking, in good ways. And so that was a reoccurring theme that the three family members I spoke to all shared, was that we saw this and it served us well in our personal lives and our careers. I think the one person reached out who was 7 or 8 at the time and went there with his dad, and he remembers thinking at the time that it wasn't going to, he knew, in the late 70s, so kind of towards the end of Gordon's life, he remembers thinking, I don't think my dad's car could probably handle this, a big truck could, equipment could, but he thought, I don't think my dad's car could take this. And also, Fargo's a long ways away. But one thing that sat with him was Gordon had kind of been talking about, probably to this guy's dad, about easements. And he said, he had no idea at 7 or 8 what an easement was. But I guess Gordon was frustrated that he couldn't get an easement because he wanted that straight line, right? And so he, instead of giving up, he was like, you know what, I won't get that straight line I wanted, so I'll have to go around it. And to him, that kind of, he said, was kind of like a metaphor for how you should, act and think in life. And instead of giving up when there's a problem, go around, and that's still better than to give up. So yeah, and another neighbor, who Clarence Badger, he lives in Cloquet now, but he actually bought some property on the Tamarack River from Gordon, and so and then his father-in-law was that's who he delivered gravel with. Anyway, he kind of said, we didn't talk about that part, kind of the what people thought of it at the time, but he still, like he said, he delivered the gravel, and Bushnell would not accept help in spreading it or bringing it where it needed to be, and he respected that. So it was an interesting, I think everyone respected the hard work of, an 80-year-old at one point. So yeah, I think there was mostly, people maybe thought it was odd. It's kind of funny, it's kind of odd, but there's a deep level of he said he's gonna, so he's gonna, and I think people identify with that and can respect that.
And let's not shy away from the fact he made 12 miles. It seems like, when you look at it in the perspective of, it's 12 out of 200, it feels like, he didn't really accomplish much. But 12 miles, that's like, imagine building a road that's basically the length of, or almost the length of the Grandma's half marathon.
Right.
That's far. That's a lot of highway to build on your own.
Right. And his ditches, I guess, were 8 to 12 feet deep in some spots. He was going through bogs, and so he would lay down, called corduroy, take a tree, lay it down perpendicular to the road and just do a bunch of those, and then build the road on top of that. That's how you kind of get through marsh and bogland. So he was not messing around. I mean, this was not light work. He wasn't just cutting trees and saying, okay, that's whatever feet wide, done. I mean, he was building the road. I mean, it wasn't paved, but he was building a pretty sturdy, what would be probably like a snowmobile trail or something. But he was doing it single-handedly with, occasional help from the grandchildren who, Brent Bushnell, one of the grandchildren, said, their way of helping was sit on the back of the grader that was being pulled by the tractor, and they would make sure that the pitch of the blades were in line. So there was the occasional help, but
perfectly safe role.
Yeah, exactly. He said there was be rocks flying. Yeah, but no, it and then Tim, another grandchild, he said that even today, I mean, they use their section. I think they have that mile and a quarter or so section still. Forgot the exact distance, but they have a section still, and he calls it a gift because it's their own private playground. I mean, they're out wintertime, snowmobiles. They've got all sorts of trails on their property, and kind of the spine connecting it all is Highway D. So yeah, it doesn't serve the purpose that Bushnell envisioned, that Gordon envisioned, but it still serves the family. So yeah, and it's an interesting story nonetheless, and forever tied to Charles Kuralt, who Brent actually met. So Charles Kuralt, famous broadcaster of CBS On the Road with Charles Kuralt, actually owned a radio station up in Ely in the 90s before he died, just shortly before he died. But he would, I guess when he was passing through the area, would go visit Gordon. And then Brent, who was on a flight from New Jersey to Minneapolis, noticed he was sitting back in coach, I think, and Kuralt got up from first class to go use the restroom in the back of the plane. And he was like, hey, that was Charles Kuralt. All right. Plane lands, chases him kind of down the jetway, meets up with him and says, hey, I'm Brent Bushnell. I'm Gordon Bushnell's grandson. And immediately Kuralt knew who he was. He said he was sorry to hear about the stroke that Gordon had. And I guess, so they talked for about 10 to 15 minutes. And Kuralt was living in Connecticut at the time, and the Bushnell family has family history that goes back to the 1600s in Connecticut, I guess, in that area. And so there are things named after them over there. And so Kuralt would send Gordon, family history information over the mail. And so they remained in touch, I guess, after this. And Kuralt wrote about Gordon in his book. Many of the obituaries when Kuralt died mentioned, the story he did on Gordon Bushnell, who tried to build a road himself, and because I think it embodied the types of people and stories that Kuralt was after, and the types of stories he liked to tell. And so he's kind of forever, their legacies are kind of forever tied now.
Gotcha. So we kind of speculated about this on part one. What kind of became of the road? What exists? We kind of speculated that always kind of got reclaimed by the wild. Is that what became of it? Or
in many spots, yes, you can still see it from the air. You can find it on Google Maps if you know where to look. In some places, they've kind of where it crosses a road, they've let it really overgrown so people don't take it thinking it's a public trail or whatever. So it's kind of got a buffer between a larger road and the actual Highway D. But yeah, so they mow it and maintain it on their property. Keep it clear for ATVs and snowmobiles, and it sounds like maybe a neighbor does as well. Where other people, probably the further you get away, I don't think necessarily do. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at it in Google Maps because then it intersects with an existing road. It ends, Highway D ends, which is all mostly partially overgrown now, crosses a road, and then it's a actual paved street that exists. So he had hoped to kind of connect all these different linkages and stuff. But yeah, so it's maintained by a few for recreation, but and still visible, but not all the way through.
So Jimmy, I don't feel like I need to ask why this fits in Northlandia. I feel like we've answered that pretty thoroughly between part one and now part two, kind of solidifying its Gordon Bushnell's claim to be Northlandia, to be a Northlandian. But why do you think the story? Why does it seem to resonate with so many people? You there's a reason why it's interesting that this is like, our first real part 2. Like, we've had a couple sequels in Northlandia, but this is our true part 2. You put the call out there to hear stories from people, and it was pretty immediate. You seem to get, like, here you are with your next Northlandia story, again, following up with part 2. So clearly there's interest and there's a resonation of this story. And why do you think that is?
I think the oddity of it, but also it's paired with kind of the hard work ethic and passion that someone has their entire life. And I think people identify and respect that. Even maybe if it on the surface sounds a little odd, I think they respect and understand where he's coming from. So yeah, he didn't give up, and people get that. So I think that's what sits with people. He was a hard worker his entire life. When he was a teenager, he was a cowboy out west, worked on his family farm, Jackson, Minnesota, was a state legislature, couldn't get the state to do it, so he did it himself. And yeah, building the road, he would buy 40 acres, build the road, sell off the 40 acres with a right-of-way for his road, and then go to the next one. And then when he would hit state land, he would just plow through it. Like, he would not ask for permission, which do not do, but that's what he did. When it got to state land, for him, I guess it was fairly fair game. Got in trouble once, I think, for crossing, I think, the Tamarack River. He put some culverts in, and the state, maybe the DNR, kind of was like, hey, yeah, no, you can't do that. Either he had done it already or did it anyway. And you look on Google Maps, and there's still some remnants of kind of some of the things he had put to cross rivers and marshes. So in the end, he prevailed. But yeah, stuff that wouldn't pass today probably at all, but he did it anyway. And he carried around, they showed me a pamphlet when I went to Tim Bushnell's house, and he showed me a pamphlet that Gordon would carry with him that explained, the economic powerhouse that this highway could bring by linking, the farmers out in Fargo to the Seaway, Duluth. I mean, this was, in the 50s when the St. Lawrence Seaway was it was under construction. We were going to have, cargo vessels connect the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean, and that was new and on the horizon. And so he was saying, hey, let's get agriculture and other industries along the way are, a direct shot right to the ports. And so he saw it as this like post World War II development that would really, bring a lot of prosperity and economic advantage. He's got that road mapped out. I'm looking at it now, and he kind of has where it ends and begins based on existing roads. So a little shy of Duluth and a little bit shy of Fargo, but for the most part, a straight shot. And I guess he carried it around with him everywhere he went. He went to public meetings at towns that would have been along the route of it and advocated for it. So he was passionate about it to the end.
All right, I think we'll wrap up there. Jimmy, thanks again for bringing this back to us again. It's really interesting to hear some more stories about this true Northlandian.
Absolutely. Thanks, Wyatt. And
thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, as well as see photos, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. Next week, Jay Gabler joins us again to now tell the story of the Victory Chimes, a 125-year-old sailing ship that had a brief but impactful stay in Duluth. You can find all the episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to the Duluth News Tribune at duluthnewstribune.com/subscribe. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe can have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnews.com. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.